Okay, so this is going to wrap us up. I know it's been a long day, but I've got a few things to go over with you. One of them, I just want to take a few minutes to review kind of what we've been through. First of all, thank you for your generosity at our auctions to help us raise some funds. I really appreciated Janine's message this morning and her singing as well about maintaining balance, about work ethic, checking our blind spots, don't compromise our values, and don't tell me but show me, probably my personal favorite. And I think you heard actually a little bit of that from everybody today. We heard a little bit about the efforts going on at our Cardinal power plants to keep that reliable, and appreciate Bethany and Eric being here to share that with us. We heard something about distribution challenges that I'm not sure you've thought a lot about, but it's not just EVs. I think there's some challenges on capacity, but also on aging infrastructure, and what that's going to mean to costs and rates going forward. And I think that's something that we're going to be dealing with, not only because of the electrification that we're going to continue to see, but also the inflation that we've already seen and how that's going to sort of fill into what our costs are going forward. We had a great discussion about communication strategies and safety culture and leadership responsibilities, and thanks to Corey and Dwight for sharing that with us, about the community impacts that we can have. And then lastly here about this energy transition and how some of the market design issues are affecting that. So I got to find, do I have a clicker? Yeah, okay, good. Let's get to the presentation. Okay. Last 12 months have been a little wild. We have seen, you can probably see Steve Nelson and Dr. Saxton in there somewhere, but we've seen a collection of circumstances all in one year of very high market prices, of very high inflation that we faced in pretty much everything that we buy, record earnings for Buckeye Power, and maybe for some of your cooperatives as well. We saw higher power costs than we expected that we had to pass on to our consumers. We lived through this winter storm Elliott and kind of saw once again how potentially devastating significant cold weather can be on our electric system. Then we had a really mild winter, January through March, and a sort of a collapse in energy prices and its effect on Buckeye and our financials. And now this summer we've started the EPA onslaught of what I'll call radical environmental proposals that are going to be difficult for our country to sustain. This is just kind of a long list. I'm not going to run through all of it, of some of the highlights this last year, but all this stuff really happened in the last year. As I said, we had record earnings at Buckeye, but we also had higher costs than we expected. And our board has done a really thoughtful job through the year of trying to balance those things out and return some of the excess earnings that we had from both excess energy sales, from a property tax settlement, from our performance during Winter Storm Elliott, all provided financial resources that we've returned back to you to pass on in lower rates than they would have been otherwise to your members in fuel costs. First of all, about $28 million in fuel costs that we did not collect this last year, but just wrote off to help keep bills down a little bit. We've deferred $15 million into the next couple years that will serve to reduce rates in future years, and then written off some legacy assets that we won't have to continue to collect in future rates. So that all those things sort of help. We did retire $37 million in capital credits last year, one of our biggest years ever. We're planning to retire about $30 million a year back to your co-op for each of the next several years. Our board's worked on trying to levelize some of those returns of capital. We continue to evaluate our generation performance, how long it's going to last, how much do we invest, how do we manage our workforce in a way that we get more predictable results, and try to manage this balance of long-term cost exposure and near-term supply risks, making sure it's reliable now, making sure we're not on the hook for too much later, and by the way, we haven't figured that out yet, but we're working on it. We've got a record level of participation at our Colt Lyman Training Facility. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but you all have seen that in your shops, whereas we've seen a lot of turnover, both from demographics as well as people changing jobs more than they used to, and that's had a big impact on your shops and also on our training efforts. We have started this on-site line worker development program where we're bringing some of that training out of the classroom and into your systems and with your people on site. So I think that's a really positive thing that I expect will continue to grow and improve. And then finally, we're looking at the latest rural utility service clean energy program and how we might be able to utilize some of those resources to increase some of our clean energy footprint and do it in a way that's at least marginally positive financially. So we're working on that. I'm not sure where that's going to take us yet, but we're going to have to get going on that yet this year. So we've all seen this thing. This could be pretty much anything, but it's really electricity prices for electric cooperatives, for Ohio utilities, and for U.S. utilities. Since the beginning of 2022, electricity prices around the country are up about 20% from where they were at the end of 2021. We've seen less of that at co-ops, but they've gone up. We've seen more of it here at IOUs. And frankly, it's hard, the thing about inflation, prices go up, they don't usually come back down. On power supply, we may see some moderation that'll help a little bit, but a lot of the other costs that we've seen go up are going to stay up. I don't think trucks are going to get cheaper, poles are going to get cheaper, a lot of the other things that we buy. So we're going to be faced with increasing costs that we're going to have to pass on to our members. And I would just say, be reassured that other utilities are passing on more costs than you are. And I think that's pretty evident in the facts. This last year, we've seen a lot of new faces. We've gotten a lot of new ideas, but we're all trying to work on the same mission. So I talked about our COLT program. We graduated 29 apprentices as journey linemen this year. We enrolled 34 brand new apprentices for next year, and we've got 12 people that are somewhere in the middle that are going to require some training going forward. So that's a lot of new faces. We've got 4 new managers in the last year at our distribution members and several new directors that I think we saw earlier today. We are adding a lot of new skills and talents at our co-ops. We're losing some experience, but mostly I think we're really having to work on our culture more, because as you change people, it makes you focus on your culture. And sometimes we take that for granted, but making sure that our culture remains service-oriented, safety-focused, that we continue to learn on the job, and that we are dedicated to continuous improvement at what we do. I think those are all important things for us. We're facing significant regulatory issues right now. Last year, 2022, we had a Supreme Court decision that finally put to bed the Clean Power Plan that was first introduced in 2014. It took 8 years for that to get from cradle to grave. And it fortunately also provided some direction to our government on some of the limits of the regulatory state and how it might impact industries like ours. But we also heard from our current EPA administrator about a month later saying that they're going to issue regulations that will make the industry conclude that clean energy is less expensive because we're going to make regular energy so expensive that they'll have no other choice. Well, I mean, that's a point of view. And frankly, I will say he's been true to his word. They've issued 5 significant regulations this year affecting the power industry, from ozone transport to water discharge to previously closed ash impoundments. They've revisited mercury and air toxics, which have been regulated a few times. They've revisited greenhouse gas rules. And they're proposing to require maybe someday technologies on our current here and now power plants, or we're faced with retiring them. And I think ultimately, once again, we'll be successful with really the Supreme Court serving as a firewall against crazy right now. I think ultimately crazy won't win, but it's going to take some time and it's going to take some money. Just to review a little bit, the greenhouse gas rule that EPA just issued in May that we just filed our comments on last week requires coal plants to have a 90% carbon capture and storage system by 2030. Well, so just a couple things. Nobody's ever demonstrated a 90% carbon capture system on a coal plant ever in the history of the world, let alone operated one for more than a couple years. And we don't know where or how we would store that much carbon dioxide. Or we can co-fire with natural gas to be able to operate for a few more years. I think Our ballpark estimates at Cardinal is that somewhere around $50 or $100 million to get to operate for a few more years. That's kind of hard to swallow that pill, so we'll have to think about that a little bit. Or they say, or you can just retire all the coal units by 2032, which is really pretty much what that rule would require. And so that's why we're going to have to continue to fight hard against it. They've also put in place for large baseload natural gas plants a requirement they use 30% green hydrogen by 2032, even though there's nowhere near that amount of green hydrogen available. And oh, by the way, it takes almost as much electricity to make the green hydrogen as it produces. And then that goes up again in 2038. Or they can do carbon capture, which they can't do either. Fortunately, they've said natural gas peaking plants they're going to leave alone for now, but we'll get back to that later. So, you know, it's an unreasonable rule. I think that probably works to our benefit ultimately, but in the meantime, it's going to cause us a lot of consternation. We just heard from our grid operator, PJM, the largest one in the world, largest in the United States, and they are seeking market design that provide for reliable generation performance. I think Mr. Hawk did a pretty good job of outlining their concerns. I think we have some different ideas about what some of the solutions are, but I think other people have different ideas too, and I think that's PJM is earnestly trying to work their way through satisfying the competing interests of states and regulators and utilities and cooperatives. But ultimately, we got to do things that serve customers, and I think they've got that in mind. We saw Winter Storm Elliott again expose some of the vulnerabilities, and then as he explained, you know, load growth and reducing thermal generation leads to kind of a does not compute future right now unless we make some changes in what we're doing. This is just a quick, you know, thing. You've seen this before, but these are all the power plants that have retired since 2011. Actually, this hasn't even been updated in the last 3 or 4 years because it's so depressing. There's no need to put any more big dots on there. But we've seen a lot of retirements, and we've seen another 5,000 megawatts retire this year just in PJM, just since Winter Storm Elliott cut us right on the edge again. So the situation is getting fairly dire. You know, he showed you that this is the U.S. version of what he showed you for PJM. It's the same story everywhere. Coal is about half of what it was 10 years ago as far as the amount of energy it supplies. Natural gas has about doubled to pick up most of that slack. And wind and solar is now around 15% of our electricity supply mix nationally. It varies regionally. We're kind of at the low end. Out in California and Texas, they're at the high end. And then nuclear and hydro are about the same, and we hope that they remain at that level that they're at. This is the North American Electric Reliability Council's report earlier this year where they said, okay, it's like yellow's kind of bad, red's really bad, grays, you should be okay, but we actually had rolling blackouts in about a third of that gray area this last winter. So we are at a critical stage, and you know, they always say, you know, when you're in a hole, the first thing to do is stop digging. I'm not sure we've gotten the first step right yet, but we're going to have to stop digging and then start fixing, and so that's just the state of where we are as an industry right now. And you do see, though, here in PJM, we're, you know, no matter how much our concerns are about our reliability, we're relatively better off than most of the country, and hope to stay that way. This is a picture of our Cardinal station. You know, Bethany and Eric have seen these words a lot, but safe, reliable, cost competitive, environmentally responsible. That's what we try to do every day. It takes a lot of work to do each one of those things, and you got to balance those things. But we are right now substantially complete with our transition to be compliant with the disposal of all of our coal ash wastes, or what they call CCR compliance, coal combustion residuals. Today, we are selling all of our gypsum and about 20% of our fly ash. We'll probably get $20 million in revenues this year. Those used to be costs to dispose of. Today, that's $20 million of revenue coming in from people that are putting that to useful purpose in our society. So that's a really good thing, and we're hopeful that the ash sales will grow over the next few years. We're spending a lot of time with the workforce trying to focus on more predictable actions and outcomes, because what we do every day really matters. I mean, I think they did a good job of showing some of the challenges on a winter day, but there's things that happen every day that got to be addressed, and the more predictable our actions are, the more predictable our outcomes will be. And then we have to prepare for the reality that we're probably going to live through a period of time with a lot of renewables and low price for natural gas sometimes, where the price of electricity is relatively low and there's not a lot of value from our power plants. And then we're going to faced with periods where severe weather events are going to have critical effects financially as well as on reliability, and we're going to have to be ready for both. And that's challenging, to put money in every day when it's not worth a whole lot, to be ready for the day when it's critically important. And that's the challenge I think that we have at all of our power plants right now as we look ahead. So the last thing is, just kind of a picture of this evolving circumstance that we have in the energy space right now. We sit here as one little company. We're a little over 1% of the PJM footprint, and that's 22% of the country. So, we're a small cog in this big machine that runs our country, but we're in really strong financial position. We've got very competitive resources today. We're focused on our plant operations and getting better at it, I believe. We've got relatively clear partnership arrangements with AEP and with OVEC now, so we kind of know what the deal is. Not everything about it we love, but we understand it and we know kind of what the path forward is. But we have unclear regulatory impacts that we got to deal with. We have a federal government that is very focused on climate policy, that's got a very ineffective Federal Energy Regulatory Commission right now that seems to be mixed up about everything, including transmission policy and what to do about that. We have what I would call a radical EPA right now that's not very thoughtful on their proposals. And then we have a Supreme Court that basically is serving as our firewall against some of these issues, and fortunately we have that at least. This industry response is been challenging. You heard from PJM, they're seeking solutions, but I don't think you heard any answers today. I didn't. I think they've identified the problem, and that's a good step, but solutions are still coming. You have the North American Electric Reliability Council sounding the alarm bell, saying, yep, we got problems. And to a large extent, the large utilities in this country are paralyzed by a conflict between environmental activism and what that means to their shareholders, their ability to borrow money in their boardrooms, to their ability to keep their jobs as CEOs, and as well as, though, the clear recognition that they all have good engineers that work there and realize the same kind of things that Mr. Hawk just went through with you, that we are on a very difficult position on reliability. So, as a country, I think we just got to get our heads around this issue of decarbonization. It is continuing. I think what Mr. Hawk said is certainly true, that our power grid's going to get greener and cleaner. We are going to see electrification of automobiles to probably a larger extent than most of us believe right now, as well as other things. So we're going to be faced with more electric demand, which means that we're going to be more dependent than ever on our electric system. So having it be resilient, not just reliable, but reliable through thick and thin and all kinds of circumstances, year in and year out, is a tall order. But it's what people are going to demand from us eventually. And then I think the biggest issue right now that we face is the timing of how all these changes take effect. How do we balance out how fast do we meet our environmental goals versus how much do we have to slow down to maintain the reliability of our system while we figure out what a more resilient thing looks like. So those are all challenging things, but I think there are problems that can be solved. And sometimes maybe you got to try crazy before you can get it right. So we'll see how that works. But we're going to work our way through that. That's all I had for you, I think, today. I do want to give a couple minutes for people to ask questions. I do want to, before we get out of here, though, make sure that we thank Missy and Ryan for pulling this all together. I hope everybody will give them a nice hand. I heard Doug helped a little bit too, but sometimes that went both ways. So we'll call him a net break even. I don't know where Doug is. There he is. So thank you all, staff, for putting this together. Everybody else that contributed to this, we really appreciate it. It's been a good conference in my eyes. I think we heard a lot of things, we saw a lot of things. And I guess I'll close by just saying that I hope that we didn't just tell you that we care, but that we showed you that we care about plant reliability during extreme conditions, about communications to member and community, about the community impacts of our actions, about grid reliability and resiliency. And I hope we didn't just tell you, but we showed you that we care about our safety culture and its importance to all of us going forward. So thanks to everybody for that, and I hope you enjoyed the conference, and I'll give you whatever questions you want to ask before it's time to take off. Oh, and do we ever find out about our auction results, by the way? Oh, okay. Well, are you going to come and close us out? Okay, good. All right, because we have some questions for you, too. Okay. Any questions for me? Wow, we were very effective this year. Okay. Going? It's like an auction. Oh, okay, all right. Here's one. Hi, Reed.
Pat, you had a question mark after it about transmission.
Yeah.
And you've also brought up about reliability and resilience. And here in Ohio, what is your take on that situation?
Well, so our transmission policy is not really great right now. It's, what the utilities have determined is spending money on transmission is really good because they get a good rate of return on it. Don't have to be very concerned about being cost conscious about how they spend that money. But the reality is we also need to rebuild much of our transmission network. It's something that needs to be done. We should be able to do it more cost effectively than what we see right now. But there's no policy drivers to push that, and I think that's a problem. And then I think getting the right transmission in the right place should matter a little bit more than it probably does. Right now, it's just a race to build things. So I think those are some of the policy issues. I will say, as electric cooperatives, we've been largely underserved by the transmission network across Ohio. And so we have more to gain by this continued build out than most. And so we do need to have transmission improvements. We'd just sure like to pay a lot less for them than we're faced with. We have been, and we've been making almost no progress, but we're still working on it, yeah. Anybody else? All right, Missy, come on up while we'll give them the auctioneers. Dan, you want to say going, going, gone or not? I'll say it. Going, going, gone. All right. Okay, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you all being here. Thanks, Missy.